Welcome to another episode of the Cubic Report. We're glad that you could join us here today. We're going to talk about the wildfires in California, which are now in their third day. It's been a great tragedy that's been unprecedented, that has destroyed so much property, but also has been very personal in that it has caused the destruction of much personal property of people. It's been a horrible situation. But my guest today is the pastor, the United Church of God pastor for the Los Angeles area, which encompasses many of the locations where the wildfires have broken out. And my guest today is Mr. Frank Fish. So hello, Frank.
Hello, how are you, Victor?
Well, I'm doing fine. I'm so glad that you were agreeable to do this podcast because I feel like there are so many things that we need to say to inform people firsthand as you are right there on the scene of what's happening. As I mentioned, Frank Fish is the pastor of the area. I have known him for decades, probably 3 or 4 decades. I used to work in Pasadena and live there for 5 years, plus go to college. So I'm familiar with him and his wife, Valerie. He's also been very involved with the travel business. He's an entrepreneur of Travel Gallery. So anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all the work you do and the people who listen in. I think it's fascinating today, the tools we have to communicate with each other, and hopefully we can parse through some of the things that have happened and help your listeners glean a lesson or two about their own lives and increase their faith about what God's doing.
Right. And right now we have many questions, all kinds of questions as to why and how, and the more television you watch, I guess, the more confused you can get, but it's just been a very big tragedy. And Frank lives in Sylmar, which is at the junction of Interstate 5 and the 210. And that's where I believe the second of the fires erupted, the Hurst fire. And the first list that I got of endangered people that I might know, Frank was on a list of those who are kind of on call or to be contacted, possibly be evacuated. But as things turned out, he has been spared of that. But that has not been the case with others. A very good friend of ours living in Altadena, his house burned to the ground. Somebody that I had been to his home, been there for meals, a very, very fine individual, and I just could not believe. His wife sent out photos of the fire creeping up to their home. They said that the Ring camera that they had in their yard went blank because they evacuated, and then when they came back several hours later or in the morning, their house was gone. She had a picture of their home, and my heart sank because they're such fine people, fine Christians, and you have this terrible thing happen. So this is a little bit of introduction here because Frank serves people in the greater Los Angeles area, plus people in Bakersfield. So Frank, tell us a little bit about yourself and what's happening.
Well, as you mentioned, we live here at Sylmar between the 118 and along the 210 and where the 210, 5 and 14 actually junction. It's the place you go up through Santa Clarita, up through the Grapevine. It's the nexus to come out of Los Angeles. And the Hurst fire developed late in the evening, I believe Tuesday. In fact, time order-wise, the Palisades fire had been Saturday, Sunday. And then this fire in Pasadena, the Eaton fire, named for the Eaton Canyon in East Pasadena, began about 6:03 or so, they feel. And that's when we started getting messages from Ted and Kim. Actually, I was down in the Hollywood area that evening for a function. And so all the way in and out of that, I'm starting to get texts. And it's interesting technology-wise, right? I mean, so the Budges, it's Tim and Kim.
Yes.
Budges, you mentioned, who lost their home in East Pasadena. And so they sent me this, hey, could you send out a prayer request? And imagine technology on your cell phone, standing in the lobby of an event. You go and you find out the last time because there's several ways to do a list these days, whether it's out of your MailChimp account or whatever. And you instantly say, well, what's my fastest way to get to that, right? And you get the answer. So I had an email I just sent a few weeks ago on something else to the church congregation, because usually I use a MailChimp format. And so I had all the addresses. And the nice thing about a plug to the IT department at UCG is if I have a UCG email, I can send up to almost 500 people at a time,
Hmm.
which is really important, because otherwise you get throttled back in your Gmail account or something like that. So I instantly revamped an old email, put in the request for the budgets, and I was able to send it. Was going to send a picture, and then that got throttled out. And, you're in a lobby and you're looking for 2 bars instead of 1 bar. So anyway, I'm just saying that because this is how life develops, right? Life is sometimes surreal. You don't expect what's happening. And then by the time we left down there about 10:30, of course, the budgets were already evacuated. But then we noticed that the Hurst fire came up near our house, which is by the crow flies, it wasn't very far. But the good news is the wind was blowing towards the west, and so that would keep the fire towards the intersection of the 210. So we were never in an evacuation zone as we have been in the past. Uh, the winds were really unique this time. A lot of times we get Santa Anas and they'll blow, and usually they either come over our range
Hmm.
down the Las Rita Canyon, or they come across the Mount Wilson and down through that area. And usually over the years, you learn this, one side gets it heavy and the other side doesn't. So we were kind of mild over the weekend, but the winds were clearly aloft. That's what helped the Pacific Palisades fire move so quickly throughout that and down to the coast, where there's the pictures here. I mean, of course, none of us are going over the Palisades because we don't want to cause a challenge. And we don't really have immediate friends or members or past acquaintances who live in the Palisades, but it's a real tragedy over there. I mean, it's just massive, dozens of streets, someplace over 1,000 homes in Pacific Palisades. I'm not sure they have, and plus businesses, schools, all the type of stuff, infrastructure. But then the Pasadena blaze began, and like I said, we never had the evacuation. Noticed that quickly Altadena, East Pasadena, and then fire moved across and to Altadena, jumped. So they evacuated all of Altadena, Pasadena down to about a villa south of Washington. They issued an evacuation notice
Hmm.
all the way west. Eventually, that included JPL and La Cañada, standby for all the Arroyo Seco Rose Bowl, and even La Crescenta because it's attached to the backside of La Cañada.
So I saw some of the names of people who were endangered, and I know that they live close to the Rose Bowl area. Of course, we lived just over the top of the Rose Bowl for a while there in West
Linda
Pasadena.
Vista on the other side.
Yeah, Linda Vista. That was the name of our street, I
Yeah.
believe. And so, I saw those names. I thought, wow, this is getting close to home of knowing these people. So,
Oh yeah. Well, the Helgies were over in the Linda Vista area, and last night they went ahead and went out with their daughters because they didn't want to have to move in the middle of the night. And so, which I think is a good caution. Talk about lessons. I would like to encourage people. When there's an evacuation notice for standby or whatever, kind of prepare. My wife said, "Well, Frank, what if they do put us on standby?" So we went to the kitchen because we have a list that we kept from past years inside the one kitchen cabinet. We take the list down and it says, Frank, take this, Valerie, take this, our daughter, take this.
uh-huh.
What are the because if you only have a few minutes, what are the most important things? Do you put your pictures above or your insurance documents above? Which comes first? And, so it doesn't take long to fill up a suitcase. You know what I mean? So,
Mm-mm.
but something as simple as a list can help you because all of a sudden your brain, it's fight and flight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to judge how that goes. So, I mean, that's what, as we go through Pasadena, a lot of people quickly, have to decide are they fleeing. Like the Budges left, hoping that they would get to come back. And on their street, the house beside them is not totally destroyed. The 2 houses down, perfect. The house behind them is destroyed, and others. So, I mean, and we're not talking about partial burns. We're talking about ashes down to the
Mm-hmm.
floor. There's nothing left.
Were they able to recover anything, the Budges?
No,
Oh,
no, there's nothing. I mean, you can tell from the picture, there's nothing.
yeah, I saw the picture from Kim, and it was just nothing like a bomb hit it. It was terrible. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
honestly, when Bev and I saw that, I cried. I mean, I just started bawling because I just felt so badly for them. I've been to their home. We had dinner at their home a number of different times. They've been hospitable to us. One time during a rose parade and everything, and then just to see this was just so saddening. It just really hit home.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I just always enjoy because the members across Los Angeles, especially Pasadena, everybody's been together for decades and decades. And so whether or not people, can currently go to church or because we see people, over who we know over the years who are at weddings and funerals. And so everybody starts to call each other. In fact, I had a call from Rob Gordon over in the West Valley, who they're a Sabbath keeping group. And Rob calls me because he was on the street and got a call from the son-in-law in Texas of one of the couples who comes with us now, Gary and Marianne Hireman and Carol Ann Davies. You'll remember them Davies from years
Yeah,
ago, right?
yeah, yeah.
Well, they all lived together in Pasadena on the street, and Rob thought when he went by their house because he was checking on some other people that their house was gone. Well, come to find out, Gary had stayed to be with the house, and the ladies had gone to the hotel, and he's well up in age, and so but the kids couldn't get a hold of him. And come to find out, in the middle of the night, he lost his cell phone. But the house was spared; it wasn't gone. So he's with the neighbors. So I had to get another member to go over because we thought he was staying, and yet another member who was in the standby zone,
Hmm.
the Madisons, but the Madisons don't always keep their cell phones charged. Lesson learned, folks, keep your cell phones charged. You know what I mean? So they were like, okay, so we had to dispatch one member because we think the guy who lost is over there, but he's not there. So, but that couple's okay. So then I get the text message and the report back. And so it goes over, and sure enough, Gary's there. But the fellow we send grew up with Gary and Mary Ann's son, Keith, who lives in Orange County, and who was going to come up and try to make sure his dad went to the hotel. But this fellow, Robert Lyons, went over. He knew Keith, so he called Keith on the phone, found his dad. So we got his dad over to the hotel, trying to connect him with mom and Carol. So all these little things are going on. Members are connecting with each other and trying to help each other. And we have what do we have on the list? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It was about 15, 16 families that I updated the congregation yesterday. I think you saw the list. Standby status is whether they were evacuated,
Hmm.
whether they're not. Like I say, it looks some are still without power. The Wofords are without power. The Grinnells are without power. I just heard a message, and I haven't had a chance on my way in, that even the Dardens way out in Thousand Oaks are now without power, and that may be because of power lines from the Pacific Palisades, or another fire that's now in Calabasas.
Yeah,
So,
I know that
um,
somebody had written to me here about Larry and Pat Darden. Are they okay? So I'm glad to get this confirmation from you.
yeah. Well, I mean, I have not called them yet. I was, like I said, I was on my way in before this call. But their thing is, I would look at the fire map, aren't near the fire per se. They're just without power. So
Yeah.
that happens to a number of people. And so hopefully we'll see over the next 24 hours a number of our members who are in standby mode that those areas will dissipate. But Pasadena is well hit, and Altadena, as you know from over the
Hmm.
years, and we all know people in various Church of God fellowship. Like I was really warmed that Rob, Rob took a call from somebody who he used to know as a student whose parents were parents, and he called me, and so we exchanged information again about how to help each other. So we're just trying to rally around those people who are in need.
One thing,
So
Frank, that was very impressive to me was the fact that people who knew each other from the past, perhaps separated into different groups, know, are able to communicate now with this tragedy that's taken place. People are showing kindness one to another. Let's forget maybe some things that were unpleasant in our past, but let's help each other. And I found that to be very, very touching.
yeah, and I think it's one thing, that we've had the opportunity over the last 2.5 decades, or maybe more, 30 years in LA, because of weddings and funerals, right? And we have this in various pockets in the Churches of God communities, right? We have to kind of suck it up, you know what I mean? And for the want of good, right? You go and you pay respects to somebody, and or you go to a wedding and you give. God talks a lot in Paul in the New Testament about not thinking too highly of yourself and esteeming others. Well, some days esteeming others is just being present, honoring them, giving them a smile, acknowledging their their graduation, their wedding, or their loss. Today, I just went down to Brea, a man who was a part of our congregation over the decades, but was actually institutionalized for his severe mental depression. And Paul Shemet, a deacon in our church, who's just a wonderful, wonderful man, Paul and Bonnie, and they actually were in the standby, so they got out of the town up to their daughters near
Hmm.
Ventura. But Paul had always looked in on Jim, and come to find out, Paul got notified that Jim was getting to hospice, and within 2 days he died. But then Paul got a call from the mortuary and says, "Well, could you sign off on these papers? He's supposed to be buried on this." And Paul says, "Oh, okay, really? Well, here's this man who had these challenges, but 20 years ago made sure that his funeral plot was done, the services were prepaid." And so, and I said to Paul, I said, "Well, Paul, we've got to go. You can't allow a man's life to not go unnoticed." So, what a privilege today. Brea is only about 8, 9 miles from John Garnett, another John and Becky Garnett,
Hmm. Hmm.
live in
Absolutely.
Yorba Linda. So, I said, "Hey, John, how's your schedule today?" Because Paul couldn't make it. He was clear up in Santa Barbara, and we didn't want to cause this burial to not take place. And it was clear that it was down in Brea. So what a privilege today to go down and go to the cemetery, and they had the plot already. And so John and I, just two Christian brothers, sit down, open up the Bible, read First Thessalonians 4, right? What wonderful words would you want? Said at your graveside that you are sleeping now, right?
Uh-huh.
What a beautiful thing. And so then John and I uttered a prayer together. We just thought, oh, wow, it does. Here's the rest of this tragedy going on, and yet you have to keep honoring people and honoring what God's done in their life, whether it be somebody who had a huge challenge, and yet look at all the elements of faith and all that. So it was
Well, that's
kind of
right.
an inspiring day.
Yeah, those are things that we can preach from, about, and all that as theory, and they're just abstract comments. But when it's down to the rubber hitting the road, when you have to do it, it's just amazing how people can come together. What will it take for us to come together? I know
Well,
that.
I think what comes together is we have to respect the life that God puts in
Hmm.
people, not just the life that we want to recognize and the faith we want to recognize. Where's God working in their life? Every human being is made in His image,
Hmm.
right? So I pinch myself all the time. That person, there's something going on in there, right? We don't know all the time. So,
We don't know that, and they're on a path that between them and God, and hopefully we'll all end up at the same place, eternal life. And that's our business.
Peter says, doesn't he, to Timothy in First Peter 2, verse 4, God desires all men to be saved.
Hmm.
What a wonderful! I mean, I think Paul came to think very expansively of God, uh, and a tragedy like this, I think you see it in human beings. There's just this innate respect that people have for life, which is a good thing, right? Let's have
Hmm.
respect for life and where people are. And well, that's one of the things that Ted Budge told me this afternoon. He and Kim was in the background as I was talking to them. And he said, because we were talking about how to format church this week, we got all this going on, and I think we're going to kind of have a town hall and ask for lessons learned and comments and allow people to express themselves. And Ted says one of the things that he realizes, the expressions that he's had both on Facebook and direct emails and text lets him write back, lets him communicate, lets him process what God's working on. And I mean, as far as Wayne's England, he said, a gentleman from years ago reaches out and asks, "What does he need?" And
Hmm.
Ted says, he says, your highs and lows, but it just brings out, you know, the best in you. It brings out compassion. I think compassion expressed to other people does incredible things to the human soul, right? I think we have to recognize that when we're real with people and expressing all these things. So Ted says it seems very therapeutic to be able to receive those notes and reply to them and things like that. And I find it therapeutic. I'm asking this deacon to do this, and I'm calling this person, and this elder's calling that person. Just the whole ring of influence, right? That this person knows this person, and so you're trying to make sure everybody's covered, right? We literally went called your old friend Ole Zajac, So I got Ole on the phone. I didn't want to miss anybody, so we're going down the roster. Well, this person, yeah, that we need to check on them. Where are they? What they doing? Are they in standby mode or have they left? And so you just have to take help wherever you can get it to move things along.
With Ted Budge, hundreds of people know him. It's a well-known name, and please, hopefully he might hear this podcast, but we love him and Kim very, very dearly, and just feel badly for what has happened. And Ole Zajac and I go back a long, long ways too. We're both fellow Ukrainians. he goes back
right.
when he came to Ambassador College from Greenwich Village area of New York City, and so we've known each other for years. But it's wonderful that you have done an inventory of all the members and all accounted for. I actually was quite impressed by the television coverage, and what we followed was the feed line from KTTV, Fox News, LA, which have done pretty much wall-to-wall coverage. And they had some very, very sensitive women reporters that just went down the street and talked to people. There's some people that lost everything, lost their pictures, and they were just extremely sensitive and very, very kind in the way they expressed themselves. But I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of blame shifting now with what has happened. There's just a lot of people blaming each other for no water and other priorities taking, and what caused this. There's going to be a lot of talk about this because they say that this may be the most expensive disaster that's taken place. They expect, I heard the figures from 40 to 70 billion dollars of damage that's occurred here. It's going to take a long time to rebuild some of those neighborhoods, the way it looks to us.
Well, that's true. We have to see how these things pan out. I mean, the Palisades, of course, your number of insured people probably close to 100% or something. I don't know what it would be. The city governments and sometimes the press, I just move past them to look to the facts because I think, there might be a little blame game. But after a while, most of us, and I think most normal people, just want to understand that the fire people, the emergency people, just did an incredible job. I mean, when you think about the fact that we can go on and we can go to LA Fire, Cal Fire, we can go on these websites and look at the zones, look how the evacuation is planned. I mean, these evacuation plans aren't willy-nilly. They literally have every area. It's kind of like a postal code, but they have every area in blocks, and so they just turn those on and turn them off. I mean, a lot of organized people, the fire and police and the they talked about blame. I get these overall blame, but look at the microcosm is the people, the inner communication. And we think about this from a church point of view, right, of how we interact with people. But the Pasadena Police Department, the LA Sheriff's Department in La Cañada, in Altadena, you have the sheriffs, the fire, you have city fire, you have county fire, right? Sierra Madre fire, you have Sierra Madre police. All these people, they have thought through how they're going to communicate. If you look on the bottom of the evac plan or the fire, it'll say this person is in command control. So everybody knows who's taking command of that. Not one person tries to take command of everything. Right? They have figured this out in a very methodical and pre-thought way. And I think, when we think about how do we approach our members and other people from the past, we want to engage them in a very precise and a specific way that works for them, right? I mean, you know how it is sometimes your own kids, right? You have to email one and you have to Facebook the other.
Well, this is actually very good to hear, Frank, because some of the impression I get from the reporting is that the city was caught flat-footed and not really prepared. But it sounds like there were a lot of preparations, and the possibility of fires was very, very real to people.
Oh, true. I mean, even the LA Fire Command chief said on Tuesday in a meeting, "Hey, we're okay on the Pacific Palisades." He says, "But thankfully, we don't have any more major incidents in the county right now because that would start to stretch our resources too thin." Well, sure enough, by 6:03, you've got Altadena, and by 9:03 or 10, you've got the Hurst fire, and uh, so, I mean, that's a lot. I don't think we realize, of course, you do from living here, but the terrain in the mountains of Altadena, terrain in the Pacific Palisades, these are not level, flat areas. You can just go down the street. These are
Hmm.
very windy areas. And but the fire command and control. We have a member who works for the Department of Justice, and he, although his family would be in a standby location, he put them in a hotel nearby so that if their area changed, which it did get changed to an evacuation, he didn't have to worry about them. And then he was up, I think, the next 30, 36 hours helping because he's Department of Justice as an officer. They move, they help. Once again, here's the feds. Here's a department of the federal government that works in LA in a totally different job description than normal, right? And they're there. They were there evacuating an Altadena elderly home,
Hmm.
right? A care facility, and were there using their big vehicles that look like movie trucks, with
Hmm.
their dark nomenclature, not your normal ambulances. They were using everything they could to move these senior citizens. You should have seen those guys. They were lifting the one lady. They realized, well, they could put her in the back seat, so they had to take her out of the wheelchair. And these guys are lifting her up to put her in the vehicle, and the wind is blowing. I mean, I don't know whether people on other parts of the country understand. This is not just a northern wind. At this time, really, they were hurricane force winds, tracked at 98 and about 98, 99 miles per hour, but they come in gusts. Usually, when they hit our house, not quite that hard, but we have wind a lot of times down the canyon, and they'll roll in, and they feel like a wave hitting the house, and then they go away, and it's silent, and then it hits again, and that's what you had, rolling, reeling uh, waves coming over the mountains and down through Altadena, Eaton Canyon. So it moves it west. It moves it very fast, and it's blowing the sparks. So that's how you get one house that burns and one house that doesn't. So, uh, but people just, I'm always impressed at how our members have stayed in touch with each other and keep, trying to circle the wagons. And so you just have to kind of take inventory and let everybody do their wonderful magic.
That brings me up to the next point: is that people, I run a nonprofit called LifeNets, which has to do with what we do disaster relief as well. And I know that people will be asking me, how can we help? And I know that there are immediate things. We are standing by ready to help, and we will. I'll put in the show notes to this podcast. I'll make a notification of that. But we do want to help. What can we do to help the people in your church area and people associated with the people in your church area?
Well, we appreciate that, and you came to me almost 24 hours ago with a uh, offer of support, and there's one family who actually we know probably right away needs some help. Their son, who's an adult, he attends with us full time, and the parents are helping with another church group. But we've made sure that we went to them right away, and so we know that we'll extend some of that help that you're willing to offer to them, because if you it depends on where you are in life and how you have access to insurance and what do you have as a way of savings to be able to get yourself through. Or even if you're insured, how do you get yourself through to those payments, et cetera? So I mean, you never know where people are, and so we're trying to keep our ears to the ground. And our local treasurer, Lauren Osterly, just a lovely guy. He taxes his business and everything. So when we need to give somebody money, he says, oh, so he calls him up and says, I can sell you the money. And what a beautiful thing. You don't have to go and find cash. You can get it into their account instantly. So
Hmm.
we appreciate Lauren's efforts. And so we'll extend that help to these families. And we may even have some families here who've been on standby who have been out. And so we'll make sure that uh, that they're not overly impacted. And
Yeah.
through your
Well,
support, we really appreciate it. And I know we heard from Lewis and Elena Van Orsdal with Good Works too. So we appreciate all those efforts of help, and
mhm.
we'll make sure we pass that along.
Okay, because we are prepared, and I know that with a disaster like this, there's of course the long-term things of rebuilding. What we're talking about immediate things. I mean, you've lost everything. You don't have toothbrush. you don't.
That's right.
You
Yes.
don't. You
Yeah.
don't. You don't have clothing. You need some cash. To be able to just get things to get going
Yeah.
again, and the moral support. So.
Yeah. No, we really appreciate that, and I think you can't underestimate the value that means to people. I mean, the text message when I talked to this one individual, and they already are in the middle of a mourning situation. This lady's brother died, so they are scheduled on Friday to go to Texas. So now, they've lost their home. Do they even have the right clothes to go to the wedding? I mean, not the wedding, the funeral. And
Hmm.
so then they gotta go out and then come back. I mean, and that'll be a real surreal trip, right? You're going to bury your brother, and now all the while thinking, I got to go home, and to what? Am I going home? Where am I going? I mean, this is what you have to, and so and just the moral support on it. He says, well, so if the offer still stands when we get back, I says, of course it still stands. You know what I mean? and so you can see just in the tone of the text, oh, thank you. You know what I mean? It doesn't take much sometimes, but the offer of support to help people through, that they can think about tomorrow, right?
Hmm. What other kinds of help are on the way? Do you think? I'm sure that people are looking for help. Is FEMA going to do something? What's going to happen?
Oh, I think that's the government. The governor already declared a state of emergency, so I think that frees up certain lines uh, of support. I know that from past, in 1994, we had the earthquake in the North region. Of course, we had instant FEMA help. I can remember being outside, and I decided to take the fireplace down because it's teetering at the top, and the FEMA guy comes up the driveway, and he says, well, I guess you. I guess you'll need this check. I said, yes, bring it on, buddy. But I mean, I know that sometimes in the past, you hear about challenges with FEMA and other agencies, but most of these people who work in these agencies are very diligent. They're following procedures that have long been written and established, and it's and that's where maybe we have to help members and others in our community. How do you get to those resources? Are you going to have the printer to go print the form? Sometimes you just have to know how to navigate through a channel. It's not that support's not there. So maybe that's where, support from LifeNets or Good Works, whatever
Hmm.
comes along to help, push people through the eye of the needle, if you would. And so
Hmm.
I just see, because I know just like you, I'm a part of Rotary, and our Rotary Club has members across the Altadena, Pasadena area, and our meeting was canceled this week. But I know the wheels are turning on how do we offer, like you say, ground level support to help
Hmm.
people in the short term. I think that's uh, rebuilding communities as other people who've had disasters, whether it be hurricanes, whatever. It's long, slogging work after the initial's gone. So,
So, is there anything else, Frank, that you'd like to share with us?
well, I think Ted. It's kind of both ends of the spectrum. Ted and Kim Budge made the comment that they were encouraged by a 91-year-old neighbor of theirs who was interviewed and who had lived in the community up there by them over 60 years. And you would think if there's anybody who says, oh, forget it all, right? He goes, well, I guess I got to rebuild. And Ted says, well, the 91-year-old guy can say that. I've got to be able to say it. So you never know what encouragement you give to people by having this. It's not just a positive outlook. You have to have this realistic view that you've talked with God. And as Ted and Kim said, you have your ups and lows, and the NORADs, having their ups and lows, and then other people who are without power, but they rally around the faith they have in God and look for ways through. Looking God to guide their steps and ways. And then I think the other little story is great. The McLarensberries were preparing up in Altadena to leave their apartment. And their 2.5-year-old looks up at mommy amongst they're getting the hustle and bustle to get out the door, to get out of the evacuate. And she goes, "Mommy, God bless." And the parents looked at each other. "Oh, we haven't paused and prayed." If you wonder whether or not you're making an impact on your children through your daily faith, there it is. A little 2.5-year-old reminds you, let's pray to God. And some days that works out and the house is saved, and some days that works out and the house is gone. But you still have your faith. You still have a God who's going to say, "Get up and let's do something again."
Out of the mouth of babes. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
Frank, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time at this short notice to be able to give your impressions. I know they'll be valuable to the people listening.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much for the support with LifeNets. It'll mean a lot to the people involved. We really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. We can't say thank you enough.
Thank you for joining us today. Please share this podcast and tell your friends about it. We can be found on a variety of platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, and most other places where you get your podcasts. You can easily find us on any browser by simply typing in The Cubic Report. You can reach me by email at vic@cubic.org. vic@cubic.org. Have a great day.